Good morning to all. Myself, Dr. M. VIJAY, Professor and Director, Center for Disaster Management, Annamalai University. So now I am going to discuss about the topic of disaster management. So first thing, before entering into the subject, we should know about why we have to discuss about the disaster management. Why a separate field has been created? Why the disaster management has to be discussed at the present time? What is the answer is, nowadays the disasters are frequently happening not only in India, all over the world. So United Nations and World Health organizations and all the important international organizations are keenly observing the solutions for the disaster management. So, thinking in that importance of this field, we are discussing about the disaster management. So, first entering into the disaster management, we should know about the basics of the disaster management. That is a basic fundamental. The fundamental thing is, first we should know about what is a disaster. A disaster refers to a sudden catastrophic event and causes significant disruption, damage or destruction to life, property and the environment. So, in simple words, what we can define the disaster is, it is a major event, major damage occurring to the human life, that is loss of lives, loss of their livelihood, loss of infrastructure and property damage, and even up to a high level of environmental damage also. So it is called as a disaster. More number of fatal things, fatal deaths were involved if a disaster happens. So how, for example, we can say, by example, say earthquakes, flood, volcanic eruptions, industrial accidents, and all the things, tsunami, and all are coming under the disasters events. So, first thing we should know about the definition for disaster. Next thing, hazard. What is a hazard? A hazard is a potential source of harm or adverse effects. It will cause damage. It has a thing. It is a caliber for causing harmfulness to the life or the property damage. Both the things. So, a hazard is a potential source of harm or adverse effect. It can be anything that can cause injury, damage and harm to people, property and environment. Hazards can be natural, technological or human made. For example, we can say that hazard means, previous example we got discussed now, the earthquake, floods, these are called the natural hazard. Where technological hazard means, suppose any accident happening in the industry which leads to a loss of lives, it is a man-made disaster, it is a technological disaster. And somewhat, so what we are saying, that war is happening between Ukraine and Russia, it is a man-made disaster. More number of damages are occurring to the loss of human lives and also the environmental damage. And finally, what is the definition we are going to see is risk. What is a risk? Risk is the likelihood or probability that a hazard will occur. That is likelihood, it is a multiplication factor of likelihood into severity. That is how much probability can a particular event can occur into, if it occurs, how many people get affected. That is a severity, that is the consequences of the particular event. So, we have now discussed about the basic definitions. What is a disaster? What is a hazard? What is a risk? Next, we are moving about the most important thing, vulnerability. Whenever we are discussing about the disaster, another word interlinked with the disaster is vulnerability. So, what is meant by vulnerability? It is nothing but a major hazard which people cannot withstand, cannot resist the particular event. That is called the vulnerability. Suppose if you are saying that there is a high vulnerability means, what it actually means, the people has no capability, not cope up with the latest technologies to act against that particular event. So in that case, we are mentioning that is a vulnerability is high. So vulnerability assessment, next thing, what is a vulnerability assessment? It is a process of identifying, quantifying and prioritizing or ranking the vulnerabilities in system. How much it affects the natural environment, how much it causes severe consequences to the human life and infrastructure. Based upon that, we are assessing the vulnerability situations prevailing in the disastrous event. So, as a perspective of the disaster management, vulnerability means assessing the threats from the potential hazards to the population and also the infrastructure. So, what are the things going to affect because of the vulnerability? The basic thing is a technological system, that is information communication system. If a disaster, if a cyclone is occurring, means immediately all the power lines and other cable lines are damaged, will get damaged. So the communication systems got damaged. So loss of a communication system, the energy supply system, EB power cut, shutdown of a power system, and water supply systems, water lines and the drainage lines are got damaged due to falling of heavy objects on it. And also I already tell about the vulnerability. So these are called the vulnerability. If the vulnerability is high, more number of damage will occur into the people and environment. So in other definitions, we can easily understand what is a vulnerability. Suppose if the exposure to the hazard is high, and but at the same time the capacity to cope up with a particular vulnerability is also high, means that the result will be a low vulnerability. If suppose if a cyclone is happening in a particular coastal area, we are having a more number of disaster preparedness technologies, so that we can act against, we can resist, we can withstand the cyclones. So in that case, even though the exposure to hazard is high and the capacity to cope is also high, then the vulnerability it will be in a low vulnerability. So the table column basically discusses about the relationship between the exposure to hazard versus capacity to cope. So in that way also we can easily understand what is vulnerability. So next, how the vulnerability situations arises. What are the things, basic things which leads to high vulnerability situations? I already explained in the previous slide also. For your easy understanding, I explained this to the present slide. See what is the progression of the vulnerability, how the vulnerability progresses. Basic root causes are limited access to the power, infrastructure, resources. There will not be any resources to utilize to act against a particular disastrous event. And the ideologist, political system and the economic systems are very weak. They are not pre-planned to act against a particular disaster event. So these are the root causes for the progression of the vulnerability. Next thing, dynamic pressures, lack of local institute, training, appropriate skills, that is a skilled development program, using conducting various training and education program. We can impart knowledge about the disasters and how to face the disasters. So in that way we should act towards the public. But if we are not doing so, means it becomes a dynamic pressure. And macro forces, rapid population growth, rapid urbanization, arms expenditure, deforestation. If there is a deforestation is happening there, more number of trees are cutting, the forests are clearing. So there is a possibility of soil erosion due to heavy rainfall. So this becomes a disastrous event. So it becomes a dynamic pressure. And another thing is unsafe condition. Unsafe condition means what we can say, that a fragile physical environment. It includes dangerous locations, unprotected buildings and infrastructures, fragile local economy, livelihoods at risk. Some people are living in the slopes of high mountains near the Himalayan regions, even in South India also, Kodaikanal, Ooty. So if a landslide disaster occurs, their vulnerability will be high. For example, recent disaster happened at Wayanad, Kerala. More people living along the slopes of the mountains. Due to the landslide, more thousands of people got disappeared. In the sense, they got affected more and loss of livelihood also. So in this way, your vulnerability progression depends upon the root causes, dynamic pressures and unsafe conditions. So a risk in addition to hazard and additional to the vulnerable situations, a major disastrous event occurs. So what will be the major disastrous event we are mentioning repeatedly? It is nothing but earthquake, high winds, hurricane, cyclone, typhoon, flood, volcanic eruption, landslide, drought, virus, bacteria, pest. Virus, bacteria means recently we have experienced corona. It is a biological disaster. It's a due to some biological organisms. It causes a disastrous event in which more loss of lives occurred in all over the world. Even the world fears of the biological disaster. So another thing is fire accidents and chemical accidents, radiation, radioactive leakage in the nuclear power plant. It also acts as a major disastrous event. So next thing, this is the vulnerability profile of India. So see 58% is earthquake prone area. We should do some hazard mapping zones in which what are all the areas they are prone to floods, are prone to earthquakes, are prone to cyclones. So we should already define the areas hazard mapping. We will be calling that as a hazard mapping. So based upon the hazard mapping, vulnerability profile of India is displayed in this present slide. So in this slide we come to know that 58% earthquake and 16% drought condition, 12% heavy rainfall and flood, 8% cyclone prone areas and 3% landslide. So these are the simple vulnerability profile of India. The same slide explaining the same thing. 50% area to earthquake, 28% to drought, 8% to cyclones, 12% to floods, 18% to landslides, 15% area, 50% area to forest fire. Forest fire means wildfires. The fire happening inside the forest. So as a result, due to a large fire broke out, it results in a loss of extinct species and more number of animals get into death. I think if I am right, for 3 years before, that's a huge fire in the Amazon forest. So it is a best example for the wildfire. It's a forest fire. We can interchangeable word. So next is the parameters for vulnerability. What are the basic parameters of vulnerability means? What are the key reasons for ever increasing levels of vulnerability are rapid population growth, where disaster events claim more lives. We can discuss this point also a maximum level, for example, due to the rapid population, the people is encroaching all the natural sources. Something like they are making the livelihood along the bank embankment of rivers and the slopes of the mountains, and they are encroachment of water channel also. They are depleting the natural resources. So water sources, they are making their livelihood and they are settling there. So as a result, due to rapid population growth, where disaster events claim much more lives. So heavy rainfall occurs means there is no way, there is no proper water channel. The water should go along with to the and join with the nearby river. So all the water channels are encroached and the people are a settlement of people. Due to the more number of people are moving from villages to town for their livelihood. So they are occupying their all the natural resources area. Environmental degradation due to poor land use, deforestation, over cultivation and overgrazing. So I explained this in the previous slide. So deforestation plays a vital role in the landslide, soil erosion, because more number of trees will they will not loosen the soil. They will tightly fixing the soil. They will not allow the soil to loosely packed. So forests play a very important role in avoiding disaster. They render the second point. This render the land more prone to floods and landslides. Increased rate of industrialization and rapid urbanization without the necessary safety measures. As previously told, that the people are making their settlement along the hazardous areas. For example, what we can say, they are making their settlement along the side of the Sipcot industrial areas. If anything happens in the Sipcot industrial areas, it becomes a major emergency, and also major populations get affected due to that particular industrial accident also. And the next thing is impoverished conditions, and next blind adherence to cultural practices. In some places, the people, due to their sticking to the cultural practices, they never allow to go for some technological advancement and development in their own areas. So it is called as a blind adherence to the cultural practices. Next, gender inequalities. Gender inequalities, in comparing to the man, the women are not giving a proper education and knowledge about the disaster, so they are getting worst affected in any disaster events. And the next thing is a war and a civil strife. The war between two countries results in a major disaster event, and lack of public awareness and information. Lack of public awareness and information means the people doesn't know the value of the natural resources. Without knowing the value of the water resources, they are encroaching all the water resources and blocking the water channels and making settlements over there. So we should impart knowledge how these water resources play a vital role in avoiding the drought conditions, and moreover, it will make the underground water level high. If we are having more number of ponds, lakes, we have created. And next thing, absence of preventive and preparedness measures for disasters in developmental planning. So this is called the disaster preparedness, which we are going to see in the later slides. And next is neglect of development issues and concerns. They are not allowing any government schemes or government plans to implement their villages, strictly adhering to that already said to the blind ignorance to their cultural practices. Next, factors influencing vulnerability. We can classify vulnerability also. First thing is material or economic vulnerability, means inadequate access to resources. The resources will be plenty or abundantly available, but it is not easily accessible. So that is called the material or economic vulnerability. And social vulnerability means disintegration of social institutions and structures. Ecological vulnerability means degradation of the environment and inability to protect it. The degradation of the environment means, just now I explained that safeguarding the water resources, safeguarding trees, and promoting plant growth, and promoting social forestry. We are creating forest with relation to the regular forestry, that is called social forestry. We are creating social forestry. And another one is organizational vulnerability, means lack of strong central safe and grassroots institutional. So there is no proper government policies. They are not properly planning, and even though if there are any more sufficient government policy also, it will not be reaching to the grassroots level. That is the most thing. Any government scheme introducing mere introduction will not lead to success. That the government scheme, the purpose of the government scheme, it should be reached to the grassroots level. So if it doesn't, even though you are having more number of government schemes, beneficiary schemes, but it's not reachable to the needy persons. So those people who are requiring that help, they are not getting benefited. The scheme is not reaching to the grassroots level, so it becomes a failure. So that is called as an organizational vulnerability. And the educational vulnerability means inadequate access to that information and knowledge. So we should train the people about the disaster and how to face a disaster, how to recover from disaster, how to make the disaster consequences very low consequences. In that way, the people should get educated, and the knowledge should be imparted, and more number of training programs should be conducted in the disaster prone area. That is the most important thing. Now our central government institutions, state government, disaster management authority, all are giving importance in giving training and education to the common public people. And another next thing is attitudinal motivational vulnerability. Low level of public awareness. Public awareness is most important. They themselves should act against a disaster. They themselves should preparedness against disasters. Unless we give the knowledge and the training and the education to the people, they will not be get awareness about the disaster. So lack of public awareness, it is called the attitudinal and motivational vulnerability. Another is political vulnerability. Limited access to the political power and representations. And the government is totally isolated from the people. Only the government is running for the higher end people means it is called as a political vulnerability. It is basically government is of the people, by the people, for the people. That the principle should be established. And the government should go towards the common people and village, and they should give a proper facilities to act against a disaster. So if that is not happening, means that is called as a political vulnerability. And physical vulnerability means infrastructure weak. No proper planning of infrastructures, and the individuals are not properly trained to cope up with the disaster. That is called physical vulnerability. And another one is called cultural vulnerability. That is the previous slide also we discussed, the blind faith in beliefs and customs. So in some parts of India, even till date, the power has not been reached to the people due to some superstitious beliefs. If the power comes inside the village, their cattle breeds will get to death. So in this way, there are superstitious beliefs. So blind adherence to the cultural beliefs, it leads to the cultural vulnerability. So these are the various factors which influence vulnerability. So next thing, when we are talking about disasters, we have discussed about the basic fundamentals and the definitions and vulnerability, disaster, hazard, risk, and all the things in the disaster. So next we are moving to the types of disasters. How the disasters happen, source of the disaster. According to the source of disaster, it can be classified into natural disasters and man-made disasters. Natural disasters, how it is occurring, how it is happening means it mainly due to meteorological conditions, difference in the meteorological conditions, topographical, environmental conditions. Man-made disaster means technological and industrial and warfare. One thing you have to remember, over 100 years before, there is a less occurrence of disasters. But at present situations, frequent occurrence of disasters are happening. The main reason is global warming, increase in the pollution level. So the increase in the pollution level, increase in the carbon dioxide level, and it leads to the ozone layer depletion. So these are all causes to the global warming, which results in climate change. So due to this climate change, frequent occurrence of disasters are happening. So we should act according to that. So based upon that disasters happening, this slide explains you the types of disasters and sources of disasters. So in the natural disasters, again it is classified into meteorological disasters based upon the changing in the climatic conditions and environmental conditions, floods, tsunami, cyclone, hurricane, typhoon, snowstorm, blizzard, hailstorm. These are all the various disasters which depends upon the, which interrelated with the meteorological conditions, climatic conditions. Another thing, topographical disaster. Topographical, geographical locations, geographical things. What are the topographical disasters means? It is nothing but earthquake, volcanic eruption, landslide, and avalanches, asteroids. Asteroid means that stone it got burst into the galaxy and it will reach towards the earth. So it is called asteroid. And limiting eruptions. And another thing, environmental disasters which I discussed now is mainly because global warming, the change in global climate change, and we should go for the climate change adaptation techniques, and El Nino, southern oscillation, ozone depletion, UVB radiation, solar flare. Solar flare, now we are experiencing the high level of heat waves in the summer, intolerable heat waves. So even the government is declared holidays due to the high level of heat waves. for the school children. So because of global warming and the climate change, these disasters are happening. And another thing, man-made disasters. Man-made disasters, it can be classified into technological, industrial and warfare disasters. Under this technological, there is a transport failure, no proper planning, public place failure, and the fire accidents. Fire accidents is more worst happening, worst damage to the industry. Industrial accidents, main hazard is the fire hazards. And another thing, industrial chemical spills, radioactive spills, toxic gas leakage. So these are the things coming under the industrial. And warfare. Warfare means terrorism and the war happening between two countries. And another thing, the final internal conflicts. And another thing is chemical, biological, radioactive, nuclear and explosions. That is the short form they have mentioned as a CBRNE. CBRNE. So CBRNE, we can see it in a very elaborated manner. Chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear and explosives. Chemical when concerns with toxic substances that can cause harm through exposure, like nerve agents or industrial chemicals. Suppose a leakage of toxic gases. Last year it's happened in Visakhapatnam, leakage of toxic gases, which leads to 12% death. And another thing, suppose carbon monoxide poisoning, and another thing, leakage of chlorine. It leads to vomiting and nausea. If it is still the exposure continues, it will even leads to death. So next, biological. Biological in the sense means, best example is corona. Pathogens or toxins that can lead to infectious diseases such as bacteria, viruses and biological toxins. The infectious disease that occurs to the biological. Whenever any disaster, major disaster occurs, immediately the epidemic disease will emerge. So we have to take most care towards the control of the epidemic disease also. And another thing is radiological. Radioactive materials that can cause harmful exposure, such as those from nuclear accidents or dirty bombs. Radiological. Suppose, for example, we are all came to know from the history, Japan faced a nuclear bomb attack in two things, and they have consequences. They are getting affected till now due to that consequences or the severity of the nuclear bomb attack. So in that way, some radiological isotopes and the nuclear radiation leakages means it depends upon the biological half-life. Biological half-life means how much time it takes to decay half-life, half value for uranium, plutonium, thorium, and all the things are radioactive isotopes. If they got leakage, it will affect the human population around 400 to 500 years. So proper way of disposal is there. We should disposal of radioactive waste is a very vast topic. That one among the method is that radioactive use is spent materials are immersed inside or in the concrete blocks, and the concrete blocks are thrown under the sea bottom. So it is one of the radioactive waste disposal. And another, nuclear weapons incidents related nuclear reactors, including the potential for nuclear explosion. The same thing, same effects, radiological, nuclear, more or less same, both effects. And explosives, conventional explosives used in bombs and other munitions posing immediate physical dangers. Explosive means right from the firecrackers which we are using in the Diwali function also. In every year, Sivagasi is a famous place in the south of Tamil Nadu, is a major city manufacturing these firecrackers and supply all over the world. Even though how much cautious actions are taking, in spite of that also more number of fire accidents are happening. Fire accidents due to these explosives. So next slide is based upon, so we have discussed about the basic definitions of the disasters and the vulnerability and what are all the things or parameters, factors influencing vulnerability. So next we are going to see about the impact of disasters. If a disaster happens, what are all the impacts, what are all the severity, what are all the consequences, what are the public people facing due to the particular disaster event. So I am going to explain by separate manner. as a result of as an impact of a disaster, how an individual got affected, how a society got affected, how much economic things got affected, how much in environmental got damaged. So in that way, I have classified the impact of disaster. So first thing we are going about the impact of disasters, it is in the individual impact. Individual impact means a disaster can lead to injuries or fatalities, and survivors often face mental health challenges such as post-trauma stress disorders, anxiety and depression. It is nothing but, for example, you heard about tsunami that happened in 2004. In tsunami, more number of people or loss of lives happened. In that, there are some victims. Both father, mother, the parents will be lost. Only the child will be living. So it is basically mental health of the child will get affected. So that is called the post-trauma stress disorder. So even though the accident or incident got over, but the adverse effects of the event will still continue in the mental health of the child. So next, displacement. What is the other impact of the disaster based on the individual means? If the particular people's houses, the infrastructures and their properties are all get damaged, means they will get a loss of livelihood. So they will move towards some other place. That is called the displacement. And the third factor is a loss of livelihood. Lost their jobs, businesses, leading to financial instability. If your particular area faced a major disaster, means all are getting spoiled and nobody got their jobs, and therefore their livelihood, it is a must for them to earn. So they, due to the loss of livelihood, loss of jobs, their displacement will happening there. So next is societal impact as a result, as an impact of disaster, how a society got affected means it is a communal disruption. Disasters can fracture social networks and community ties and leading to isolation and loss of social cohesion. If, for example, if your particular city is it's a mingling of various community peoples living over long years, they are having interpersonal relationships, they are very harmonial atmosphere there. Suppose any major disaster events occurs there, means there is a possibility of displacement of communities to some other places for their livelihood. And another thing, public services. Public services like all the things which are all helpful to the community are getting affected. Communication services, power services, next immediate access to the resources to cope up with the disasters, and all the public services will be getting affected. For example, even the traveling route also get affected, and the particular place got isolated. So the immediate help will not be reached to the particular disaster place. So increased vulnerability, third factor. Vulnerable populations such as elderly or those with disabilities may face heightened risks and challenges in recovery. So for elderly people and child, and the third thing, woman, more the three groups, we should take more care and give more importance in rescuing and evacuating the people whenever a disaster is happening in a particular area. In the basically the disasters ethics of a disaster management is, first thing we have to evacuate the elderly persons and the disabled persons, and finally women's any pregnant women's living in the particular village. These three kinds of people should be evacuated and they should be given more importance. In the we can define as the ethics of a disaster management also. So next thing, economic impact. Economic impact means three factors: direct cost, business interruption, and insurance and recovery cost. So first thing, the direct cost means infrastructure damage, loss of property, emergency response cost can be substantially burdening local and national economies. So all the business got affected and the more infrastructures got affected. So it is a direct cost, direct loss to the particular public people. And business interruption, it's quite normal. Whenever any disaster event happening in a particular town or a place, the entire business linkages and business relationships are getting damaged. That the network chains also get affected. And finally, insurance and recovery cost. Insurance claims can rise sharply, impacting the financial stability of insurance and communities. Suppose one or two persons are claiming insurance, means we can immediately deliver the insurance amount to the particular needy person or the victim person. If the entire community is claiming the insurance, then it becomes an economical impact. It becomes an economical crisis. So unable to give the money to all the insurance claims. So these are coming under the economic impact. And another is environmental impact. Environmental impact means ecosystem damage. For example, ecosystem damage, we can see, suppose if a tsunami occurs, means the entire ocean, that sea, got damaged, and more number of species, sea, coastal sea species, sea animals, phytoplanktons, zooplanktons, all got affected, and they will not be growing there. So that a complete ecosystem damage, pollution and contamination will be occurring due to chemical spills, radiological incidents, and another thing, contaminating air, soil, water, affecting wildlife and human health also. Suppose the people are not encouraged to settle along with the Sipcot area, along with that Sipcot industrials. The people living nearby industries are all most disaster prone area, and they are living there. They will not get a pure oxygen rich air. The air is water polluted, the chemical mixed air. So these are all some of the pollution and contamination. And resource depletion. Natural disaster can strain resources such as water and arable land, leading to long-term environmental challenges. So overall, the impacts of disasters are interconnected, affecting all facets of the life and requiring comprehensive planning and response strategies to mitigate their effects. So from this aspect only, we are going towards a disaster management, a new topic emerges. So based upon the impact of disasters, again I am repeating the same line, based upon the impact of disasters, all facets of life, it affects all facets of life and requiring comprehensive planning and response strategy. It is nothing but the disaster management. What we are saying here, the comprehensive planning and the response strategies to mitigate their effects, that is called as a disaster management. So we are now only we are entering into the subject. So far we have seen the basics and fundamentals of disasters. Before entering into the disaster management, you should know about the disaster. Vulnerability of disasters, how the disaster is happening, what are the various kinds of disasters, and how the vulnerability increases with the disasters. So after all knowing these facts only, you will be able to follow the subject disaster management. So now we are getting into the disaster management area. So disaster management is what is disaster management? It refers to the systematic process of preparing for, responding to, recovery from and mitigate the impacts of the disaster. So the definition says like this: process of preparing for the disaster, responding to the disaster, recovering from the disaster, and mitigating the impacts of disaster. So this is a definition for the disaster management. So the components of disaster management, what the disaster management says, what are the phases of disaster management, what are the 4 cycles of disaster management. So what are the components means? First thing is the disaster preparedness, next thing is disaster response, third thing is disaster recovery, and the fourth thing is disaster mitigation. Mitigation is a word nothing but minimizing or reducing, not evacuating. It is minimizing the effect of disaster or reducing the effect of disaster. According to that, the plans, we are having a plans or methods or technological advancements. So first thing, preparedness is training, drills and planning to ensure readiness for disasters. So preparedness is getting ready to face the challenges for the disaster. Next, response, immediate actions taken during and after a disaster to ensure safety and address needs. For example, in Chennai, there is a huge rainfall and flooding. So, the Chennai corporation is, they are getting maximum preparedness. In addition to the preparedness, we should always ready to face the disaster also. That is a disaster response. Immediate action during and after a disaster to ensure safety and address needs. We will see a detail about the 4 components in the following slides. Disaster recovery, it efforts to restore and improve the affected community after a disaster. And what is a disaster mitigation? As I said earlier, it is nothing but minimizing or reducing the risk or reducing the hazard. The strategies aimed at reducing the impact of future disasters, such as infrastructure improvements and community education. Community education is conducting training and education public awareness programs to the common public people or the villagers who are staying nearby the Sipcot industries. So, disaster management is crucial for safeguarding lives and property, ensuring economic stability and enhancing community resilience against future hazards. Resilience is a technical word coming often in the disaster management. Resilience is nothing but resilient is that a strong environment. The people have a strong capability to withstand or resist against a disaster. So, if you having a pakka disaster preparedness plan and also disaster mitigation plan, that particular environment or the particular community is to be resilient. They are ready to face the disaster, and after disaster also they are ready to, they are in a position to recover immediately after the disaster happens. That atmosphere, that society is said to be the resilient society. So, next thing, we for our convenience, for our easy understanding, we are classifying the 4 phases, that the 4 components of disaster management, major 2 phases. What is the first thing is pre-disaster risk reduction phase. Pre-disaster risk reduction phase means before disaster we are getting preparedness, how to face a disaster, that is disaster preparedness. And for future challenges, we are improving our infrastructures of the buildings and more technological advancements that are coming under the mitigation. So, disaster preparedness and disaster mitigation coming under the pre-disaster risk reduction phase. And another thing, post-disaster. Post means after. Like we are using in the common word post-operation. Post-operation means after the surgery, the patient should be taken much care. Like that, post-disaster recovery phase. Post-disaster recovery phase, what are the thing means? Relief. First, the relief from the disaster event. The public should get relief from the disasters event. And next, they should go for rehabilitation center, and where their psychological counseling will be given there, and another all the things supportive additional requirements or things needed for the public should be supplied by the government. And another thing is reconstructions. If their properties or the houses are getting damaged, means the government will give special schemes and they will construct a house, a new house for the victims' victim families, or loss of houses. Those who lost their houses, they will be allotted house by the government. So, the 4 components of the disaster management is classified into 2 major phases, that is pre-disaster risk reduction phase, another post-disaster recovery phase. Pre-disaster phase coming, it includes preparedness and mitigation, and post-disaster recovery phase, it includes disaster relief, disaster rehabilitation and disaster recovery. The next thing is a disaster reconstruction, that is a reconstruction of buildings, houses. So, these are all coming under the post-disaster recovery phase. So, key components of disaster preparedness. First thing, we are assessing the risk, how much risk is involved in a particular disaster. Suppose already I told you, that hazard mapping. Hazard mapping is nothing but identifying the disaster prone area, whether the particular area is a earthquake disaster prone area, whether the particular area is a cyclone disaster prone area, whether the particular area is a landslide disaster prone area. Likewise, a hazard mapping should be initially done, and based upon the disaster prone area, which disaster is major disaster frequently occurring there, based upon that we should go for risk assessment. identify potential hazards in your area and evaluate the risk they pose. How much risk? Risk means likelihood of the hazardous event into severity of the event. That is a risk we are defining. This helps to prioritize planning and resource allocation. Next is emergency plan, family plans. Develop a family emergency plan that includes communication strategies, meeting points, and evacuation routes. So, for example, so people in industry, whenever there is an on-site emergency, they are making some points that designated shelter points or emergency points. Likewise, they have designated some points inside the industry. On the particular designated points, the particular people should are supposed to be there, supposed to be immediately reach their places so that the immediate rescue will be there. So likewise, the people, your family plan should be made how to evacuate, where they should go and where they get meeting points and where they get help. So according to that, emergency plans and business plan also, organizations should create continuity plans to ensure critical functions can continue during and after a disaster. Next, emergency kits. Assemble a disaster supply kit that includes essentials such as water, at least for 3 days, non-perishable food enough for the last 3 days. Non-perishable, nothing but it should not get spoiled, like this bread, fruits and biscuits. So these are the foods, they will not get spoiled, at least they will it's a hygienic facts up to 3 days without spoilage. So next, first aid supplies, any tablets or any ointments or any sterilized cloth, bandages, and flashlight and extra batteries, because a power supply will not be there. So we should get ready with our flashlight and extra batteries, and signal for help, say whistle. So whistle should be provided with every family, so that by whistling that the sound can reach so far, so that help will be get immediately. So next to personal documents, they should keep their IDs and the insurance papers. The personal document is most important for claiming any insurance money. So key components of disaster preparedness is risk assessment, emergency plans for family and also for business, and emergency kits. Next, training drills, conducting training program, mock drills. Suppose toxic gas is leakage from an industry, how the people should react, where should run, in what direction they should run. Likewise, a proper training and drill should be conducted at every regular periodic intervals, and the community engagement should be there. The community should get involved, and the communication plans, establish a communication strategy that includes emergency contacts, information on how to receive alerts and warnings. Example, local weather service, community alerts. Even if there is a high tide in sea, all the coastal people, coastal fishermen, they are getting the cyclone warning system, the early warning system, because of they are receiving messages to their mobile, instructing them, directing them not to go for fishing inside the sea, because sea is abnormal. Likewise, the communication plans and the resource management, how a resource can be managed during the disasters, and stay informed. Local emergency management protocols and updates, especially regarding weather hazards and hazard effects. So, your cyclone warning system will give warnings at every half an hour during the day abnormal conditions. So, next, importance of disaster preparedness, what we are getting from that means reduces panic. If any disaster occurs, even though a known person have a panic, get panic, and they will forget the rules and regulations, they will act randomly. So by making preparedness against a disaster, the people will get reduced panic and saves of life, minimizes damage of all the loss of human lives, infrastructure damage. So suppose if there is an earthquake prone area, means there is a building codes and regulations. Likewise, they should prepare according to them. Next, facilitates recovery. Prepared communities tend to recover faster as they have systems and resources in place to support rebuilding efforts. So disaster preparedness is essential for ensuring safety and resilience in the face of emergencies, fostering a proactive mindset and building strong informed communities. Simply what we can say is the people will never expect government to get any help from them. They themselves will face the challenge. That is the positive factor of the disaster preparedness. Next thing is disaster response. Disaster response means immediate assessment. Once a disaster event occurs, conduct a rapid assessment to determine the scope of the disaster and identify urgent needs. What is the immediate requirement? First level of requirement. Evaluate the infrastructure, resources and personnel available for the response. So we should get prepared for that and we should act according to the disaster. The emergency services activation. Emergency service activation, there is a separate wing also there in disaster field, National Disaster Response Force, NDRF people, they will immediately, already they will be there based upon the early warning system, and once a disaster event account, immediately NDRF people, any NGO are trained volunteers. Volunteers means they should be got well volunteer trained and knowledge about the disaster, then only they will be allowed to rescue people. So emergency services activation and search and rescue operations. These are the key components of the disaster response. Establishment of emergency shelters. In that emergency shelter, once the people should run towards the emergency shelter and they will be safeguarding their lives inside the emergency shelter, and they will be receiving the medical care and support. And in that emergency shelter, they will having the communication, wireless and all the things. That the NDRF persons and the disaster management officials, they will be providing platforms to know about the current situations. So, resource distribution, public safety and security, monitoring evaluations, these are the important factors coming under the disaster response. So, the importance of disaster response is ultimate results are life saving. So, more number of loss of lives will get avoided, and stabilization. Stabilization means they will be feel strong enough to face a disaster, and community support will be there, and foundation for recovery. So foundation. So disaster response is a vital phase of a disaster management that involves rapid and organization actions to protect lives, restore order, and address immediate needs. What are all the immediate needs, whether they need house or whether they need any earning field, earning job, what are the immediate needs. So likewise the impact of disaster and pay the recovery disaster for recovery and resilience. So key components of disaster recovery means based upon the assessment and planning, through assessment to evaluate the damage and identify the needs of the affected populations. Develop a recovery plan that outlines goals, timelines and resources required for rebuilding. Infrastructure restorations. The government will give schemes to rebuild their houses, and otherwise they will giving tenders or contracts to the major contractors to rebuild the roads, bridges, utilities and public buildings. And finally, economic recovery also will be there. Revitalize the local economy, such as providing financial assistance to business and promoting job creation. And also support affected individuals with job training. They will give jobs and they will give some self-supporting services, self-supporting livelihoods and placement programs. The government will be arranging, and disaster management system will be arranging housing solutions. The final factor is the most important factor, psychosocial support. As I already discussed in the introduction slide, the mental health services should be most important. That is psychosocial counseling. The victims, victim families, they have lost their relation, they have lost their parents, they have lost their siblings. So they need a psychological counseling. This is the most important factor we should concentrate in the disaster management. Nowadays all over the world they are giving more importance in the psychosocial counseling for the victims of the disaster. So next, community engagement, monitoring, evaluation, long-term resilient planning. Long time. It should not be short term. It should be a long-term resilient planning. So importance of disaster recovery means restores normalcy. Immediately, how much time it will take for them to restore their original normal position, normal life. So that is the thing. Rebuilds community and economy. prepares for future disaster. For future disaster also they will be planning how to overcome the disaster, how to face or how to getting preparedness for the disaster, what kind of disaster it is, promote social equity, so that all people are equality, they are equal to receiving the same beneficiaries from the government as well as the disaster management department. So disaster recovery is a comprehensive process aimed at restoring communities after a disaster, addressing immediate needs and building long-term resilience. A successful recovery not only restores normalcy but also enhances preparedness for future emergencies. So final component is a disaster mitigation. As I told, that mitigation is a minimizing or reducing the adverse effects of the disaster. So first point is a risk assessment. So we should assess the risk and the potential hazards and the vulnerabilities in the communities of the organization, analyze the likelihood and the potential impacts of different disaster recoveries, and land use planning. As I told you earlier, due to that rapid urbanization, overpopulation, the settlement of the people in the dangerous areas, settling along the river sides, settling along with support industries. So land use planning and deforestation, so we should avoid that. So these activities will promote the sustainable development practices that considers environmental. We can avoid the environmental impacts if we follow this. Providing, creating new water check dams, creating ponds, creating lakes, that is a water sheds, so that drought conditions will be get avoided. So water scarcity will be avoided. So our land use planning should be most important, and it should be followed with strict rules and regulations by the things. And the next is building codes and standards. Based upon the disaster prevailing in that area, the government will lay strict regulations for the building codes and standards. If there is an earthquake disaster prone area, they should not build higher heights of the building. Only ground floor is allowed. Likewise, there will having the building codes, and moreover more concretes will not be allowed, and more beams will not be allowed for that earthquake disaster prone area. For cyclone, the roofs should be taken more care, because the roofs of the house will be taken up due to the high level of speed. So based upon the disaster, building codes and the standards will be there. We should be strictly follow that. Enforce strict building codes that require structures to be designed and constructed to withstand specific hazard. Example, earthquake, hurricanes. Hurricanes is nothing but a high velocity of winds, more than a storm. Next, infrastructure improvements. And final point is the most important, the public education awareness. Unless a public got educated and got awareness, no program will be succeeded. No, whatever the government scheme will be there, nothing will be succeeded if the people are, unless they will get their public awareness and public education. They should get knowledge, and they should be imparted with knowledge about the disasters and how to face the disaster, how to mitigate the disaster, how the community participation is more important. They should make a life in the way, how to overcome the disasters, how to cooperate with the government, how to cooperate with the disaster management officials, how your volunteer got trained. So these are the various factors comes under the public education and awareness. And ecosystem management will be there. Coastal zone management. Along the coastal zones, there will not be any public to be settled there, not allowed. Because if there is any tsunami, immediately people got affected, more loss of lives will be there. So the ecosystem management, and next thing, financial instruments, financial supplies, mechanical such as insurance products, emergency funds to support mitigation efforts and aid recovery. So encourage public and private investment in disaster resistant technologies and infrastructure. For financial instrument means, suppose if you can see nearby coastal villages after the tsunami disasters event, all the more of the coastal villages are built with some emergency shelters, huge dormitory hall. All people will get inside the emergency shelter hall in due course of high velocity of winds, or any abnormal conditions in the sea level, early warning system. Through early warning system, the people are evacuated from their village. They will be settled in the emergency shelters. The government has created more number of emergency shelters in the coastal area. So these kind of financial instruments will be helping to promoting the buildings, the emergency shelter buildings. And another thing, collaboration partners with abroad countries, national aids, international aids, foster collaboration among government agencies, non-profit businesses, and communities to share resources and expertise in mitigation efforts. So these are the collaborations and partnerships. More number of NGOs, they are getting a more number of aids from foreign countries. During tsunami, India got more number of foreign aids all over the world. Likewise, by collecting these foreign aids, they are constructing major emergency shelter rooms, schools, colleges, and disaster training program centers. So using that collaboration partnerships, we are improving the emergency, the disaster mitigation level. So the importance of, as usual, then what will be the net result? The importance of disaster mitigation is save lives and reduce injuries, economic savings, enhances community resilience, because we are given the sufficient knowledge about the disaster, so they will be able to sustain during the disaster. So that is called the enhances the community resilience, promotes sustainable development. Mitigation strategies can lead to more sustainable land use and infrastructure development, benefiting both people and the environment. So disaster mitigation is a proactive approach aimed at reducing the impacts of the disasters through various strategies and actions. By focusing on prevention and preparedness, communities can build resilience and ensure safer environments for their residents. So we have discussed about the disaster management. First part of our lecture is to discuss about the basic definitions: disaster, risk, hazard, vulnerability assessment, and what is vulnerability, what are the factors leading to vulnerability, what are the different types of vulnerability. So what are the different types of disasters: natural disaster, man-made disaster. So we have more discussed and come up with the knowledge about the disasters. And after acquiring the knowledge about the disasters, we enter into the second part of our lecture, disaster management. In that we have discussed about the definition for disaster management, and it is an integrated process of four components: disaster preparedness, disaster response, disaster recovery, disaster mitigation. So we have briefly discussed about all the components of the disaster management. I hope that my lecture will be useful for you to know about the disaster management and how to overcome the disaster and what are the strategies to be followed. So hope that you have now got understood about the disaster management. Thank you for your patient listening.